Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Lewis. It's been a couple of weeks since Zohran Mamdani shocked the political establishment by winning and becoming the 111th mayor of New York City. He'll be the youngest mayor in more than 100 years. The campaign message actually galvanized younger voters. We've talked a lot about that. My guest this week is Morris Katz. He's one of the key strategists behind Mamdani's success, especially with the millennials and the Gen Z and the younger voters. Morris Katz himself is only 26 years old, and so he's worked on a number of different campaigns, but he was literally, personally hooked into the demographic that we've talked so much about. The youthful energy surrounding this Mamdani campaign reminds me of what we talked about in our series last year on John Lindsay, way back when he brought a bunch of 20-somethings into government and gave them a whole lot of power, by the way. It all more or less worked out, but there were a lot of questions asked along the way, so we've got plenty to talk about here. We've got a person who is working not just on New York City politics. He's also involved in a number of races around the country, and we're going to get into that as well. So, Morris Katz, thanks for coming in. Good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
How did you get hired by the Mamdani campaign?
I was working on Dan Osborne's U.S. Senate race last cycle, as well as a number of other different races, including Congressman Jamal Bowman in New York. And a few different people had reached out and flagged for me, Zohran Mamdani is thinking about running for mayor. And as someone who's born and raised in New York, I knew I wanted to be involved in the 25 mayor's race. But not knowing much about Zohran, was kind of skeptical at face value of if this was someone who could be, have a viable campaign for mayor. Mm-hmm. And then someone put us on a group text thread together and said, we should get together. Let's grab a coffee. I thought, why not? And we sat down at Kawa House in Astoria, and within 2 minutes, I was like, this man's going to be the next mayor of New York.
Interesting. What did you see at that point? Because if you're talking about...
It was about April of 2024.
Yeah, okay. So April of 2024, he was not even at 1%, right? He was 0%. Zero name recognition. There were a number of different candidates who were being kicked around. It wasn't clear, though, that the incumbent, Eric Adams, was, he was still viable at that point. He hadn't been arrested yet, right?
Yes, no, he was still far more viable. We thought the race was against Eric Adams, and then by the time that he was launching the campaign in October, it was beginning to become clear, maybe Eric Adams, maybe Andrew Cuomo, maybe both of them. But I think a key thing in kind of his analysis, his vision, and the campaign's vision was it's one and the same. And if you look at his launch video, there's a kind of corrupt politicians like Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo. New York deserves better than a disgraced executive, whether it be of the past or present. And this idea that we're running against the same broken kind of politics, the same corruption, and the same broken promises.
Interesting. I definitely want to come back to that. You grew up in Tribeca.
I did.
Your father, David Katz, has a number of different credits. The one I think most of our listeners will know is American Gigolo, the TV series. But you actually worked in this, right? You were like kind of on the edge of going into the business?
That's what I always thought I was going to do. Mm-hmm. Growing up, throughout high school, I was in middle school, I started writing plays and screenplays. I think by the time I graduated high school, I'd written something like 14 or 15 different plays and screenplays. And throughout that time, I would always go be a production assistant on sets, help out where I could, spend a lot of time in the theaters during rehearsals and on different sets. And really, that was what I loved. And politics was kind of a side hobby. And then, like so many, the kind of Trump election moved something in me, and I felt compelled to start doing a little bit more on the politics side, and kind of accidentally fell into it.
As you're saying this, I'm thinking that's one more thing you have in common with Zohran Mamdani, right? Whose mother is a filmmaker, right? So you both had sort of apprenticed a little bit into that world.
Absolutely.
And what was it about the Trump win? I'm sure you saw it very differently than I did. I'd grown up watching his antics, and it took a while for us to begin to take him seriously. But it sounds like you had a different experience.
I think it was, and my relationship to that moment has changed a lot as I've kind of gotten older and experienced more, and I think as seeing everything that's happened since. But at the time, I think I was scared, like a lot of people. Like, it felt like this can't, as someone who came of age, under Obama, and this kind of very West Wing vision of what politics is, seeing that kind of rupturing was horrifying. And I felt like, I felt scared, I felt disappointed, I felt troubled. in so many different ways, and felt like I wanted to do whatever I could to push back on that. And I felt like so much of it, was Democrats' fault in terms of like there were so many things that we could have done better, that we could do differently. And, who was I to throw rocks if I wasn't willing to get in the arena?
And so your first work in politics was doing what kind of stuff?
Was knocking doors, volunteering, knocking doors for Tedra Cobb, a woman who's running against Elise Stefanik in New York's 21st District. I was at Skidmore College. And then I was also writing, kind of doing some different blogging type stuff at the time, ghostwriting some stuff. And I'd written something about a woman who was running for office in North Carolina. And she then read what I wrote about her and called me and was like, you did a better job capturing my campaign vision than a lot of people on my team. Do you want to come to North Carolina? She was going to run again the next year and work for me. And I was like, yeah, why not? Yeah,
sure. So it's nice down there, right?
Yeah. And went and then spent a lot of time in North Carolina. And I always say like one of the most formative moments for me in my politics was with this woman, Erica Smith. We did a 100-county, 100-day tour, going to every single county in North Carolina.
Wow.
And running. So this is what Erica was a state senator who's a Black woman who lived on the same family farm that her great-grandfather had bought that her family was previously enslaved on. And she was running this populist campaign, populist vision, went to every single county in North Carolina, and seeing the kind of horseshoe theory component of what so many people in those rooms with kind of some ways the opposite backgrounds, but the same struggles, and what brought them into the political process and what it meant to just show up. And what was wrong with the way the left was communicating, what was wrong with how Democrats were communicating, what was right, was deeply, deeply informative.
A long time ago, I had a job that took me down into rural North Carolina, down east.
Yeah, that's where she was from. It's one of the most interesting parts of the country.
It is absolutely fascinating. Bertie County, I used to go to Zohran County.
Right there, yeah.
Windsor, Pasquotank County. What a place.
I worked on a mayor's race over in Elizabeth City.
Oh, yeah, sure. Elizabeth City. Right. So if even people from North Carolina say nobody goes down there. Yeah. If you went to all 100 counties, you did a lot of driving.
Yes. Sure.
Yeah. But what a wonderful place. I used to think I wanted to retire down there. It's that beautiful around the Shawan River out there.
It's incredible.
Wonderful stuff. So you have that experience. It sounds like you're getting bitten by the bug at this point.
Yes, I think there was something when you see in rooms where there are people who are struggling just to get by and living lives in some ways devoid of hope, and then you see for a moment the weight of the world lifted off their shoulders because they believe in a politics of what's possible, because they believe that maybe, just maybe, someone can do something to make their lives better. I think, that's an adrenaline rush that's addictive. It's a feeling that you want to chase and you want to bring home.
But it's possibility and it's hope. It sounds like you're not even necessarily attaching that to particular candidates, but just the possibility that it can happen, right, with this or that candidate.
Yeah, I think, obviously some candidates are far better at it than others. And I think, some candidates have a vision that makes it possible, and others, I think, have the exact opposite of that. But for me, that was the draw. This is something. Politics doesn't have to just be, like Zohran talks about it in this one. I'm going to borrow his language. Politics doesn't have to just be something that happens to us. Politics can be something that we do. And I think it comes even of like the time I spent on, the reason I wanted to go into film and TV is to make people feel something.
Right.
And to make someone having a hard day have a slightly better day. And even though it's not how we often talk about it, that's what politics can be.
When you're writing ads and working on strategy, are you thinking of it that way, like a sort of a 3-act play? And does it have a lot of similarities?
I think it's important to tell a story. And I think, I think oftentimes politicians lie. And I think that voters may not need to know every detail of every issue, of every policy proposal, of everything someone's ever said or done, but they have an incredibly high BS detector. And you can't lie. And I think people also are willing to show a lot more grace, are willing to give themselves up to hope if there's a story they're being told. And I think like when you look at Zohran in New York, it was about freezing the rent, and it was about universal childcare, and it was about fast and free buses. It was about generational change. It was about an affordable New York, but it was just much about a story of, every community that hadn't seen themselves reflect in our city, about so many people who, used to love this city and now felt like it was just where they live. And I think in telling that story of what could be possible, of what this campaign was, you bring far more people in because everyone wants to be a part of a story.
So you've got this story. You've got a candidate who wants to bring that story. The specific sort of ad strategy. Who are you aiming this at? Who, as you're thinking, who do you want to tell this story to, and how did you figure out how to reach them?
I mean, so it was a kind of all of the above approach for Zohran. There was always going to be an aggressive field program led by incredible field director Tasha, who, knocking more doors than any campaign in New York City history, and feeling like we could organize and have those interpersonal conversations that could energize. And then in addition to that, there was the approach of the aggressive investment in digital content. That this should be a form of communication taken as seriously as paid television ads traditionally are, or as paid canvassing programs are, or organic field. And that for so many in politics, social media is viewed as a box you're checking rather than an integral part of the strategy. But in a place like New York specifically, there's so many young people who are not watching the evening news, who are not, scanning the editorial page of the Times, but who care about what their future looks like, who are struggling with an affordability crisis. And meeting them where they are was always going to be important early on. And then when the ad campaign came in, there were a lot of voters who had not met Zohran Mamdani yet, and that the kind of paid television campaign was going to be to continue to build with the people who we already had momentum with in younger communities and immigrant communities, but also to introduce him to older New Yorkers who maybe had seen him when you interviewed him or seen a Times article about him or something, but we hadn't had the opportunity to communicate with the frequency we would have wanted. And we were the first campaign in the primary that went up on TV. And I remember at the time some, different reporters calling me, other people calling. And a lot of people are asking questions about, are you guys going up too early? Is this a mistake? The first half of our ad was a contrast with Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo. Was that a mistake? Could you just be introducing yourself? But throughout every single one of the ads, it was about affordability and it was about changing of the guard. The first ad, talks about the corruption of Eric Adams, the corruption of Andrew Cuomo, how they're the ones who've rigged the economy against us. And the first time he introduced himself to the broadcast television audience was, I'm Zohran Mamdani, and I have a different vision. And I think that was kind of this ethos of the campaign, of we could make people feel the desire for change, for a brighter future. And also on broadcast TV, the ad we ran the most, the first line of it was, there's a myth about this city. It's a lie that life has to be this hard in New York. And then we listed all of the policies that we support. And the final line was, and it's city government's job to deliver that. And I think that was at the kind of ethos of this campaign was we're not going to be like every other politician who might acknowledge an issue, but refuses to name the villains responsible for making this an issue, and also refuses to tell you real things that can be done to make it better. This wasn't just a vision for talking about affordability. It was a vision for a city government that believes it's its obligation to make New York affordable.
Why is it important to name the villains?
Because I think you can't tell someone you're being screwed without telling them who's screwing them. It doesn't pass the threshold. In any other context, we would reject that as absurd. If you were robbed and someone showed up at your house and said, oh man, I'm so sorry you were robbed. That's horrible. No one should be robbed. People should not be robbed. Well, what are you going to do about the person who robbed me?
Right.
No, I'm just telling you that you shouldn't be robbed. That's not a sustainable dialogue.
Interesting. And then when you say you met people digitally speaking where they were, where is that? Is that YouTube? Is that
it's
Instagram?
Everywhere. It's I think in terms of Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and Blue Sky, in those places, I think it is incredibly fair for so many young people to have decided to tune out of politics. Why would people have hope and faith given the state of our politics? And expecting them to be seeking you out is wrong. And I think the idea of we're going to go on these platforms, we're going to invest in content on these platforms, and also we're going to embody a hope and energy that is accessible. And I think part of this is, Zohran. And Zohran's a younger person. Zohran's a relentlessly hopeful, optimistic, high energy individual. And that's what people want to see on these platforms. You're not going on to scroll on Instagram because you want to feel worse about the world and be not entertained.
Right,
You're going because you want to feel better and you want to be entertained and you want something to make your day a little bit better. And Zohran embodies that and the content embodied that.
Did you get insight or targeting information from the door knocking campaign?
It's an interesting question. It was all very coordinated in the sense of like we knew who we were hitting at doors. We knew who we would have a harder time hitting at doors, who should we spend more money in those areas for cable, should we spend more money in those areas for paid digital, and kind of tying all the fabric of that together. So we were there's kind of a constant dialogue across the campaign.
Interesting. The New York Times said that, among other things, you were a go-between connecting the campaign with the Jewish community. Was that an informal effort? How did that look?
I think it was just the effort of, there were growing up in New York, growing up in the Jewish community here, being a member of my synagogue. There were a lot of people. It kind of started with having just personal relationships of rabbis or leaders in the Jewish community who knew I was on the campaign. Who were like, hey, I'd love to talk to Zohran Mamdani. I think, as you'll appreciate, it's like in New York City, all politics are local. Oh, yeah. And being a young Jewish boy from New York City, that certainly felt true over the course of the mayor's race. And then we'd have these conversations and very quickly saw that when anyone who sits down with Zohran Mamdani may not walk away agreeing with every single thing he believes about Israel, but walks away believing this is someone who's going to do everything in their power to keep Jewish New Yorkers safe and who's engaging in a good faith dialogue. And, Zohran is so relentless in a desire to have conversations with everyone, to bridge divides, to bring the city together. And so it was very cool to kind of have a front row seat in seeing that play out.
And when I see, when the dust settled, you can correct me if you think the number's wrong, but I think it came out that about 30% of the Jewish vote he got?
Yeah, I think it would be a little bit higher than that, but okay. Yeah.
Yeah, which is considerably lower than I would have expected, because I saw him, I moderated one of the debates up at one of the synagogues and was aware of this conversation, both in my home neighborhood of Crown Heights and elsewhere, and I thought he was making some headway. But when the numbers came in, I said, well, I guess he didn't make as much headway as I had thought.
I think the bigotry of the Cuomo campaign and the home stretch of this race is a really dramatic component of that. And I think the depth to which they were willing to go to polarize the city, to polarize the Jewish community, to inflict real fear in the Jewish community, I think is inexcusable. And I think what you're seeing in those results, I think, Andrew Cuomo at the top of his lungs for 6 months with millions of dollars behind the effort was essentially telling Jewish New Yorkers, this person is an existential threat to your safety. And eventually that's going to break through to a degree. Yeah. And so I think it was a real organized, deliberate, cruel misinformation campaign that penetrated certain parts of the Jewish community in New York. And I think it will bear out over the course of a Mamdani administration that those were obviously bad faith, that those were incorrect, and that he's going to be a mayor for every New Yorker. But I think it's an unfortunate reality of the kind of campaign that Cuomo ran.
Yeah, how do you sort of undo that or put that back together? Is there a need for maybe an ongoing information campaign of some kind?
I think that in a lot of ways, there's many times, even with you, I think Zohran speaks clearly on these things whenever asked and has repeatedly and for many months. I think the level of misinformation out there, I think this is another component of kind of the social media environment we live in with algorithms that are inclined to feed hate and division. Right. One of the things I see most often or hear most often is people say, well, why is Zohran talking about Israel so much? And as you know, oftentimes we are not the ones bringing that up. It is questions being posed of it. Right. But then it's clipped in a certain way and it's sent out. And I think it's one of those things where he will demonstrate every single day through his actions in office the kind of mayor he wants to be on it. And I think it's why there's also, I think, a lesson here to politicians, to people running for office, to kind of very much not follow in the mold of Andrew Cuomo. And that there's a real cost to divisive campaigning that lasts long out. Andrew Cuomo gets to go back to Westchester or Florida or wherever he wants to go, and New Yorkers are here to deal with the city that he divided. And it's Zohran's who's mayor of the city, Zohran who will bring the city together. But I hope that we can kind of move past that politics in this city.
Do you think some of that backfired on Cuomo in the end?
I mean, it was interesting hearing Melissa on your show last week or so saying that they just ran to
prevent you guys from having a landslide.
To prevent us from having a landslide.
It's a bit of a stretch. Yeah.
Yes, I'm both skeptical of that, but also I think that the idea that somehow reducing a margin of victory is worth the cost inflicted on this city, is worth running ads with stamping jihadist on the forehead of the first Muslim mayor, is worth inflicting death threats on Zohran and his family, is worth raising the temperature this degree at a time that we need to be united in a front against Donald Trump, united in a front against the affordability crisis, I think is beyond dangerous. And I also think they ran a campaign catered to the chattering class and catered to the elites of this city. And I think what New Yorkers cared about was the affordability crisis here at home. And Andrew Cuomo, Netanyahu's volunteer lawyer, cared far more about trying to center Israel in this race. And voters rejected that.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. You and I both have the elites sort of within our sight, right? Just because of the privilege that we've been raised with and what you get to see. And the panic that's still going on in certain sectors has far outstripped anything rational, certainly anything that I've reported or any facts that I've seen. And people are, saying things that just, to me, aren't even internally logical and consistent, saying, oh, he can't do any of those things. And then saying he's an existential threat. It's like, well, which is it? It can't be both, right?
And look, I think, and like John said this, I think I think there are a handful, the Bill Ackmans of the world were not spending millions of dollars against Zohran Mamdani because they thought he couldn't win universal child care or because he couldn't get fast and free buses.
Right.
They were doing it because they thought he could.
Right.
And I think there's kind of a separation between the class division and the Israel religious tensions, where I think that a lot of the kind of billionaire class revolt against Zohran was driven and, fans of fires flamed by Cuomo and allies over he's in a, it's going to be a lawless city where you won't be able to have a business and he's going to try to raise your taxes and he doesn't care about you. He cares more about working people. And then I think there was also this deliberate thing of a kind of open attack that he's, some kind of terrorist sympathizer and that he's an anti-Semite and those things, which obviously kind of inexcusable across the board. And those were kind of the two core tenets of their outreach. But as the election results bared out, that is an incredibly small portion of the electorate and was kind of out of touch with where the city was.
Right. Do you have any plans to join the administration?
I'm happy we got through Tuesday and focused on helping out with transition right now, and I'll always be helpful to Zohran however I can.
I bet your phone's been ringing off the hook.
It's I've had to I owe many a people a text. If anyone's listening, I will get back to you.
No. In all seriousness, this is look, nothing succeeds like success, right? So people see that you pull this off, they're going to say, hey, let me at least talk to the guy about my possible run for Congress or state senate or something like that.
No, absolutely. And I think this is I think Zohran is a generational talent as a leader, as an individual, as a human being. And that's not, if that was replicable, that we wouldn't call it generational talent. Right. But I think there are a lot of things, a politics of boldness, a politics of ambition, a campaign practice of a believing that no one should be left behind, that everyone deserves a campaign that reaches out to them, that shows up in their community, that makes a case to them, and that we don't have to accept the old playbook of politics is something that we should be seeing a lot more in New York City and across the country.
A lot of political leaders end up running issue campaigns to help persuade the public on certain issues and help get a bill passed or get a policy accepted. Could you see yourself doing that?
I think, again, I'm focused on helping out however I can to ensure the transition is helpful and think through what a Mayor Mamdani administration can look like in all different ways, and want to see more people laser focused on affordability elected in New York and across the country. And I want to see Zohran's agenda successful. But outside of that, have not gotten into the weeds much.
Okay, fair enough. You said in one interview that the political consultant business is fundamentally broken. How so?
I think most consultants would have seen a Zohran Mamdani and would have said, how quickly can we sprint you to the center? How quickly can we abandon many of the values that you stand for? One or two of these policy points doesn't poll as well as these other ones. Let's swap those out. Or let's jam an extra 7 ones in so we can, hit these other issues too. I think as a consultant class, there's a deep problem of a lack of authenticity. I think consultants come to campaigns with their own playbook and then try to jam a player into their playbook. But as any sports fan will tell you, the best coaches are crafting a playbook around the star players. And we have so much incredible political talent in this party. So many incredible people who should be running for office, but who don't think they can because they just see the same kind of playbook run over and over and over, the same kind of politicians embraced as the hopes of the party or the future of the party, or people entitled to positions of power. And it's wrong. It's why government has failed, and it's why the party has failed.
And so the cure is what?
I think the cure is a reckoning in the consultant class. Right now, we have no accountability. People lose elections and they get promoted.
Thank you for saying that. I've been watching people fail upwards for like a generation. Where
I've seen a lot of them on your show.
We have our consultants corner. We bring them in all the time, and we don't post win-loss records or anything like that. But it does occur to you after a while. It's like this guy's had 6 losers in a row. Maybe it's not the candidate.
No, absolutely. But that's a great example on your show. It's like it should be like that, right? Like when a coach is going on ESPN, they've got record and obviously there can be great staff on losing campaigns, et cetera, but you start to notice a pattern. Also, you start to notice what gets rewarded and what doesn't get rewarded. And I think there's a real culture of protecting your own, of protecting the powers that be and the status quo. And hopefully in this election can be a reckoning to some of that. I think you see a lot of critiques at times of Zohran or a future administration that I think are coming from anonymous sources and unnamed consultants.
Sure.
And those are people who are upset that they don't have the access they believe they're entitled to and have had for decades upon decades.
Sure. Yeah, well, there is this practice, and this is relatively recent, and by that I mean I've just noticed it in the last 20 odd years. It was probably going on before that, but it really hit me that the same consultant that ran somebody's campaign, then kind of after they've won, they sort of flip into lobbying mode, right?
Yes.
And then just walk a bunch of corporate clients into the office of the guy they just helped elect.
I can tell you I will not be doing that.
You will not be doing that. Okay. Okay. That's good to know. Here's something you told Vanity Fair. I don't want to just defeat Andrew Cuomo. I want in every race I do anywhere to defeat the politics of Andrew Cuomo. He embodies the smallness and the pettiness and this desperation for power that is willing to sell anyone out, to F anyone over to get it. He's a warped example, but it's a rot that's at the core of everything that's wrong with our politics and the party. So put Andrew Cuomo aside. Maybe you have retired him, as your candidate said on election night. What about everybody else? What about the rest of the party and the establishment and people who sort of operate along the old rules that you think are obsolete?
So I would argue that Andrew Cuomo was unfit for office before he ran an Islamophobic campaign in the last home stretch of this race. Andrew Cuomo was unfit for office before he ran one of the most incompetent campaigns in political history in the primary. He was unfit for office before he sexually harassed 13 women. He was unfit for office before he sent a bunch of seniors to deaths in nursing homes. He was unfit for office when he decided to strip power from Democrats in his own state government and hand over Republican control so he could have more power. He was unfit for office when he decided to defund the MTA to give Elon Musk hundreds of millions of dollars in tax cuts. And he was unfit for office when he was battling Bill de Blasio and, deciding that he'd rather score political points and deliver universal pre-K or raise the minimum wage. And I think that we should not accept that as a party. We cannot be a party that bows to corruption. We cannot be a party that's apologetic about the role government is supposed to play in people's lives. And we certainly should not be a party that's willing to forgive sexual misconduct when it becomes politically convenient. And that's something I think about a lot. I was like, and AOC talked about this very compellingly, I thought, at one of the rallies in the primary. I will not forget seeing how many in our party and in our political class just 3 years prior were calling for the removal of Andrew Cuomo from office. And then when it seemed inevitable and it seemed politically convenient, were willing to bow down and kiss the ring because that's what was politically convenient at that moment. That can't be who we are as a party, because then we're the critics when we go around pointing a finger at Donald Trump, or when we go around pointing a finger at the corruption in the Republican Party or the lack of a backbone. We need to have a politics defined by compassion, defined by hope, defined by vision, not fear-mongering and division. And I also think we need to have a reckoning about what we believe the role is for government to play. In so many ways, the disgraced former governor's former boss, Bill Clinton, I think looms large of the era of big government is over. That we are apologetic for believing in government, that we're apologetic over the role government can play. We need the era of big government to not be over. We're at a moment of crisis, of income inequality crisis, of a mental health crisis, of young people not being able to see a future and seniors not being able to see a retirement with dignity. And it is government's job to do something about that. We should be a government with ambition and robust. And it should be Teddy Roosevelt trust busting. It should be FDR and a New Deal, Lyndon Johnson and a new frontier. And instead we're scared of our own shadow. And looking for all this stuff that Donald Trump does. He believes in a government that is aggressive and swift and bold. He got in there and Doge is, destroying things in moments. He's writing checks if he thinks he's in trouble. He's going to war if he wants to go to war. And voters are okay with it. Not because they like those actions, but because they're in such dire straits that they just want to see someone trying. They're willing to try anything if it's maybe going to make things better, but they know that there's a need for intervention because things are not working as they are right now. And I think our party should be on the leading frontier of that. Because as Zohran said in one of his closing speeches, the world is changing whether we want it to or not. The question is who's going to be changing it.
What do you make of the idea that many of these establishment politicians just get elected over and over and over again? Like that was quite a list of particulars against the former governor, but he was in office for 4 consecutive statewide elections as attorney general and then 3 as governor.
I think that we should not be complacent, and that no one is entitled to a seat in power. We only have so many of these, and we should be sending people who are relentless in their pursuit of making life better for people, relentless in their pursuit of delivering an effective government, a bold government. And too often, I think we, make ourselves comfortable with what we know and scared of what we don't. And I think part of what you're seeing in this kind of anti-incumbent wave across the country is that things are bad enough that people are willing to try something they don't know, rather than stick with what they do. But I think, we do have a lot of great Democrats in New York and across the country who are doing excellent work, who deserve to be there. But their excellent work is they don't take a single day for granted. And we need more of that in the party, and we need more people to be running for office who otherwise who don't believe that they can run for office or should run for office because they don't see themselves reflected in our politics.
I've noticed you haven't mentioned the DSA in any of this, the Democratic Socialists. Is that essential to what you're talking about, or are they just the group that Mamdani happens to be affiliated with?
I think DSA plays a critical role in New York City politics and national politics, and fills a really important vacuum of civic engagement, and of fighting for working people, moving certain issues to the forefront. I think that, it looks different in all different places of what does that fight look like, and who should those candidates be.
Mm-hmm. And was Cuomo right when he said there's a civil war going on within the Democratic Party between the DSA and mainstream Democrats like himself?
Well, he's not a Democrat anymore. I think there might have been a civil war going on inside the Democratic Party, but the guy who got Donald Trump's endorsement 48 hours from election night was not a part of it.
Okay, fair enough. But more seriously, when I brought, you probably saw me do this, there were a number of people who, just as you said, had called for Cuomo to step down as governor. And then, 48 months later or whatever it was, here they are standing with him, endorsing him and saying everybody should vote for him for mayor. And I would play the footage right for them. And I'd be like, what changed? What happened? And there was never really much of an answer. It was just kind of, I've seen enough of this. It's a very tricky business, and it's there are a number of people who sort of say that was then, this is now. different. I believed it. I said what I felt and what I meant at that time. How I feel and what I mean now is something completely different. You're calling for, in some ways, a little bit more consistency on some of these issues.
Yes, I think let's just be. If we are too often a party that's spineless, and if you have a spine, then you don't have to waver every time the political winds blow. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the problem right now is. We're a spineless party, so we're vulnerable to whichever way the political winds blow. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that even then having a spine helps dictate which way the winds blow.
You would rather have run the race you ran and not succeeded than to suddenly start sort of adding points or walking away from some of the commitments that you'd made earlier.
I think it's almost like in it where it wouldn't have been the campaign if we were doing those things. Mm-hmm. I think there's this fallacy of we should have made these choices because they were politically convenient, and that it's moral righteousness that we didn't. I think absolutely it's moral righteousness, because if I went to Zohran and was like, hey, actually, we should be doing Y thing that contradicts X thing we already did, he'd be like, no, we're not. We believe this thing. But it's also the right political maneuver. And I think that's the important thing that people want to skip over because it's inconvenient to hear, is voters are actually willing to disagree with you on certain things if you're honest with them. If they believe that you're asking the right questions and are sincere in that, they don't have to agree with every single answer you have. Mm-hmm. And instead, we pretend that it's the opposite way, where we essentially don't ask any questions and then just will parrot back whatever answer, whatever weekly poll says is most convenient. And that, I think, is where voters get the most frustrated and disenfranchised with our process.
And I guess finally, what should Democrats outside of New York take away from this? Because a lot of this campaign is very particular to New York, right? For a lot of different reasons. You're working on lots of other campaigns elsewhere in the country. Are you finding a connective thread there? Are you finding that there's sort of an emerging politics that's related to what carried Mamdani to victory?
I think we need to be a Big Tent party that is big enough for Jared Golden and for Zohran Mamdani, but does not have room for a politics beholden to corporations and devoid of ideas to address an affordability crisis. Mm. And that's what I'm seeing across the country. That's what Zohran did that I think has helped shape the voice of the party now. Everyone's talking about affordability now. I did not hear affordability being talked about the same way before June of 2025. Right. And I think it shouldn't have had to take Zohran Mamdani winning a primary to address that.
Well, I mean, that's why you win, right? I mean, that's how these things happen, one victory at a time, right? I mean, if he'd gone down in flames around that issue, you'd have to rethink the whole project.
Absolutely, but I also think it's where people are right now. Mm-hmm. And that's a critical part of it, is meeting people at the crisis they're facing. And across the country, the affordability crisis has hit a degree where it's not just working people anymore. The middle class is struggling just to get by. Young people can't get by, seniors, and that resonates everywhere.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, we're going to let you go for now. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you.
Best of luck with everything.
Really appreciate it.
Okay. If you want to keep up with what's happening in New York politics and hear more conversations with the people shaping the future of New York and beyond, subscribe to our channel. And let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues that matter to you.